One of the founding fathers of our country, John Adams, said about elections, about government. Listen to this. Government is instituted for the common good, for the protection and safety, prosperity, and happiness of the people, and not for the profit, honor, or private interest of any man, family, or class of man. Therefore, the people alone have an incontestable, unalienable, and indivisible right to institute government and to reform, alter, or totally change the same when their protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness require it. Wow. It's powerful, right? It's powerful words about democracy, what elections actually stand for. Abraham Lincoln said, "The ballot is stronger than the bullet." Wow. Think about that. The ballot, your vote is more powerful than the bullet, right? They also say that the pen is mightier than the sword. But the fact that Abraham Lincoln points out that your vote could overcome an army, can overcome tyranny, the bullets of a corrupt government is very, very powerful. So today, again, Marcus Conte reporting. I'm going to give you the evidence, the hard factual evidence, actual numbers on how the 2020 Democratic primary has been rigged so far. Now that's just the numbers, but beyond the numbers, the thing that also affects the numbers, right? When stealing an election, it's not one big sweeping move where they come in and at the last minute and say, okay, and they rig the numbers. It's a lot of small moves that add up. It's circumstantial evidence, mountains of circumstantial evidence. So I'm going to give you that circumstantial evidence right now, right? So crowded debate stage. That was the number one thing, right? You have 10, 15 people all talking at once. You keep the front runner down to a minute of sound bites. Too many contestants. Close polling places to create long lines. Purge voters. Voter disenfranchisement is what that's called. Collude with the media to smear the candidate. Rig the DNC rules to include a billionaire on the debate stage when he has no right to be there. Force the frontrunner off the campaign trail for 3 weeks before the Iowa caucus. Rig the early election polls. Rig the late election polls. And finally, rig the actual voting machines and their numbers. Now, there is no solid evidence or actual evidence that we can see that the voting machines were actually rigged. But we don't need to know that. Who is counting the vote? It doesn't matter what the machine says. It's the guy sitting in the room that crunched the numbers. And let's look at those numbers. So, here's so far what we're told and what we're told to believe that is going on in our election so far. These are the superdelegate allocations from Super Tuesday. And so far they're saying that Joe Biden has a 610 points to Bernie Sanders' 513, with 102 delegates still outstanding. It looks like Elizabeth Warren took 56, Mayor Bloomberg took 61. So that's roughly a little over 100 that went to two candidates that are no longer in the race. But look at the numbers. In Alabama, look at the with 100% reporting, Biden has won Alabama, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Minnesota, Texas, Maine, Massachusetts. Bernie Sanders has won Vermont, Colorado, Utah, and California. But notice that with all the states that Joe Biden won, there's almost 100%, with the exception of two, 100% reporting is in. In Maine, there's 98.3%, and in Massachusetts, 99.9% in. In Vermont, 100%, but in Colorado, only 79% of the vote. In Utah, only 74% of the vote, and in California, 93% of the vote. Now, these are the numbers, right? And this is what we're expected to believe, that 610, out of this election, 610 delegates have gone for Biden, and 513 have gone for Sanders. Now, what if each one of these elections had a problem where votes were being flipped, right? Biden's numbers are being elevated and Sanders' numbers are being depressed. What if that happens? Even though Sanders may have won certain states, or Joe Biden would have won smaller states down south, the allocation of delegates would create an imbalance, would create the illusion that Joe Biden has won, the factual math that Joe Biden has won, because it's who counts the votes. It's not so much, we have to look beyond the rigging of machines. Everybody says, oh, the voting machines are rigged. We can't catch them rigging the machines. It's not so much that the machine itself is rigged. It's who's counting the vote. That's where the rigging, if you want to find the rigging, find out where the votes are actually being counted. So let's go state by state. Now, here's Super Tuesday. Where is Super Tuesday? Do we have Super Tuesday up? Right. So these are the Super Tuesday states and the ones that came before. South Carolina, Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. Right. Now, we don't have exit polls on all of them, but let's just look at some so far. The other day I gave you Massachusetts, so we'll start there. Right? Massachusetts, just to reiterate the evidence that I gave you the other day, is that Joe Biden, the exit poll said 28.9, and Joe Biden ended up with 34.4, a 4.5% discrepancy. Bernie Sanders, at the exit poll, got 30.4, and the reported value, the reported vote count, was 26.7. That's negative 3.7. So when you add positive 4.5 and negative 3.7, you get an 8.2, 8.3 difference. Right? Anything more than 2 or 3% is considered election fraud. Election fraud, where the establishment is rigging the election against the people. Right? Anything more than 2 or 3% in third world countries is a signal to stop the election. But in the United States, right now, in Massachusetts, the great state of Massachusetts, Bernie Sanders arguably won the Democratic primary in Massachusetts, but because of the vote flipping, he was defeated by 6 points. Can't make it up. There's the evidence right there. So let's go further. South Carolina, which came before Super Tuesday. Let's go one by one. So Joe Biden got 44.7% in the exit poll, but his ultimate count was 48.4%. That's an 8% bump, or a difference of 3.7. A difference of 3.7 up, a positive of 3.7 in the great state of South Carolina. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, was down 1.4. So, although, according to this, Joe Biden still would have won, quote, won the election, but again, they're shaving points. They keep shaving points in every state. Why? Because of this. The superdelegate, not the superdelegate, but the actual pledged delegate vote jacks up Biden's numbers and lowers Sanders' numbers. So it's consistent in Massachusetts, right? Whoever wins, it doesn't even matter. You want to call Sanders the winner? Great, he did win. But the fact is, we're talking about delegate count. In the great state of South Carolina, we just showed you as well that Biden got an extra 3.4% of the vote. Let's continue. In the great state of Texas, this is just in. Right? So you look at Biden. Biden is got a 0.3% bump up. Bloomberg got a 1% bump up. The others are kind of, it doesn't even matter if it's 1% or less than 1%. We don't really need to look at it. But look at Sanders down here, negative 4%. They took away that equates to a minus 11.8% of the vote taken away from Bernie Sanders. So again, evidence of election rigging. In this case, because it was so close, the exit poll said Biden had a 34%. Got 34% of the vote, and Sanders got 34% of the vote. Technically, it was a statistical tie according to the exit polls, but the reported vote was much different. Biden got 30. He got his little bump up, 34.5, and Sanders lost 4, and got 30%. So they declare Biden the winner by 4 points. They also added a point to Elizabeth Warren's simple 10% of the vote. So you can see the discrepancies. Bloomberg also got a point, a discrepancy of a 7% increase in his vote. The only one consistently that gets a bump down is Bernie Sanders. Here's Vermont, for example, where Bernie Sanders won handsomely. It was almost a blowout. The exit polls for Biden said 17% for Biden and 57% for Bernie Sanders. The actual vote tally in the machine, Biden got 22 instead of 17, and Sanders lost 7 and got 50 instead of 57. So in the great state of Vermont, Joe Biden got a 4.5% bump up, and Bernie Sanders got a 6.3% bump down. That's the widest margin of all. Although Bernie Sanders still wins, he loses state delegates. So right there, you've got a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, almost an 11-point difference in Vermont. 11-point discrepancy. Again, voter fraud is defined as anything more than 2% off the exit poll. So Vermont so far, although Bernie Sanders did win by a large margin, he was the most cheating so far that we know of occurred in the great state of Vermont. Let's look at New Hampshire, something that we kind of breezed right over. It was a tight race, remember? So Bernie Sanders got 25.9% on the exit poll, beating Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar by 21.7 and 21.1 respectfully. Joe Biden got blown out in that one, 10%, so we won't talk about him. But look at the numbers here. Buttigieg, Sanders got it looks like they didn't play with the numbers down for Sanders, but they jacked up Pete Buttigieg up 2.6%. Right? And then you have a statistical tie, creating the illusion that Bernie Sanders got 25.6 and Buttigieg got 24.3. So the margin of it, although it's very close to the margin of error, again, always Sanders getting bumped down a little. And anybody, remember at the time with New Hampshire, Buttigieg was the white horse, right? He was going to carry the Democratic Party, so they bumped him up 2.6. So what does all this mean, man? So let's look at Texas. The 2020 Texas Democrat. This has some good facts about it, but it tells you that exit polls are very, very accurate. Exit polls they're almost like a magic trick. They're not like a poll before an election where people are, they're speculating months before who they might vote for. But when someone actually votes and they're given a series of multiple questions, not just, hey, who'd you vote for, but a series of gender questions, a series of questions that involve the issues that pertain to age and race and all this other stuff, right? Through that process, you narrow it down. You know who the person voted for. It's not a mystery. It's very, very accurate. For someone to lie through 10, 12 questions and have professional pollsters not be able to figure out who they voted for is really not possible. So you have a margin of error, very little. It's like 2% margin of error. So when they're off the charts, like in Vermont, 12%, 11.5%, and all of the areas in Super Tuesday, the ones that we don't even know about, right? What about these? Those are the ones we know about. What about the rest of them? What about California? Right? What about California? How many points did they shave off in California? How about Utah? How about Colorado? How about Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee? What about the big states of North Carolina and Vermont, Virginia, where Bernie Sanders in certain early polls was leading? What about Maine? What about Minnesota? We don't have the statistics there yet. We may still get those numbers. I hope we get those numbers. But you see the point, in every state where we have exit polls, they are off. And they favor the establishment pick. At the time, it was Pete Buttigieg. He was getting a little bump. And then the establishment pick changed to Joe Biden. But at every single turn of the screw, the insurgent Bernie Sanders loses points. So there's the evidence. Oh, here's more. In Iowa, remember the Iowa caucus? Now, we don't have the polling data for Iowa, but we have something that I trust, and this is Bernie Sanders' own numbers. Right? The Bernie Sanders campaign crunched his own numbers. They were on the ground. Look at the numbers. State equivalents, the good people on the ground in Iowa, the Bernie Sanders campaign, clocked Bernie Sanders at 298.5 state delegates to Pete Buttigieg 268.2. Right? Now, we don't know how much up or down Elizabeth Warren was, how much they were throttling Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden or Andrew Yang or Klobuchar. We don't know any of that stuff. All we know is that the election was said to be extremely close, and based on this, Bernie Sanders won by a solid 3% of the vote. And Pete Buttigieg was ultimately recognized as the, quote, winner of the election. So there you go. There's your evidence. Do you need more? Well, we might see some more tomorrow, March 3rd. Here's what's on the menu. Dems abroad, 13 delegates up for grabs. Idaho, 20. Michigan, the very, very hotly contested Michigan for the first of the Rust Belt states. Big state. Mississippi, 36 on the line. Missouri, 68 votes. North Dakota, 14. And the great state of Washington, 89. At this point, I think the polls, the fake polls, are irrelevant at this time. It doesn't even matter, because it's. I just think the cheating is overwhelming at this point. And here are the numbers. So just to reiterate, if the alleged vote count, state delegate count, is 610 for Biden and 513 for Sanders. Arguably, easily, Biden got an extra 100 and Bernie got shaved off 100, in my humble opinion. I think that the great state of California will reveal a lot more. The idea that Joe Biden got 25% of California is very, very hard to believe. And with 415 delegates, Bernie Sanders could easily, if it were a fair election, pick up an extra 20, 30, maybe 50 votes in the great state of California alone. So that's your menu for tomorrow, and we'll have more to say about that as more polls come out. As I said, we haven't seen the exit polls in these other places. On March 10 tomorrow, going forward, we'll have more. But wait, there's more. On March 17, we'll see Arizona with 67, Florida with 219, Illinois with 155, Northern Marianas with 6, and Ohio with 126. So that's what we can be in store. Right now we have 37% of the vote in. By the time March 17 rolls around, we'll have 61% of the vote in. Going forward, we'll then see a little bit more on we'll see Wisconsin on April 7, and then the big enchilada April 28 is Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. New York being the biggest, 274 delegates on the line. So, does it make your blood boil? I mean, it certainly does to me. Right? It makes you lose faith in a great democracy. That the candidate of the people, by the people, for the people, the candidate that's rising up in the ranks is clearly, unequivocally being cheated. Now, I know it shouldn't be a surprise. We knew it was coming. The disgruntled mainstream media and the disgruntled internet pundits will say, "We told you so. We told you it was rigged. How dare you? Why would you believe that it's not rigged?" Well, that's not the point. The point is that it comes back to what it comes back to what John Adams said. I'll read it again. Government is instituted for the common good, for the protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness of the people, and not for the profit, honor, or private interest of any man, family, or class of man. That includes the elections. How are the people's voices, how are they heard? They're heard through a free and fair election. Without that, you have nothing. You have no voice. You have tyranny. Therefore, the people alone have an incontestable, unalienable, and indivisible right to institute government by voting, and to reform, alter, or totally change the same when their protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness require it. Meaning that you petition Congress for change, amendments, changes to the way we're doing business. Capitalism, the capitalist trickle-down economics of the 1980s, the invention of Alan Greenspan and Ronald Reagan, fizzles out, or maybe it never worked in the first place, and at some point you have to change it. You don't just continue it until you have, less than 1% with all of the money, and 99% of the population squeaking by. Right? Grotesque income and wealth inequality, petitioning the government for change. So that's where we're at right now, and I'll leave you off with this, because since Bernie Sanders looks like he's going to get cheated and no one's going to stand up for him, and he might not even stand up for himself and call it out, now that the evidence is on the table, this is what you get. Mr. Joe Biden, enjoy yourself.
We choose truth over facts.
He's saying that it was President my boss. It was his fault.
I was a Democratic caucus. You ever been to a caucus? No, you haven't. You're a lying, dog-faced pony soldier.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Friend, time friend, and she's a friend. She's been my friend in and out of public life.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Tomorrow's Superstar Tuesday. All right, Chuck. Thank you very much.
All right. It's Chris, but anyway.
Chris. My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like what you see, help out. If not, vote for the other guy. I love this place. Look, what's not to like about Vermont? One of the things I'm proudest of is getting passed, getting moved, getting control of the Paris Climate Accord. I'm the guy that came back after meeting with Deng Xiaoping and making the case that I believe China would join if we put pressure on them. You had people like you had people like the former chairman and leader of the party in Germany. Go to Joe 30330. Watch what happened when those kids from Parkland came up to see me when I was vice president. They went into and some of you covered it. It's not that they don't want to help. They don't know quite what to do. Play the radio. Make sure the television. Make sure you have the record player on at night. The phone. Make sure the kids hear words. And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Marcus Conte reporting.